Exciting and fast-rising new band House of Protection are creating a little bit of magic in the music scene these days. They released their first ever songs earlier this year, and they played their second ever gig only this week in London. And they're already creating music and live shows that have everyone talking for good reason. I was very fortunate to be at their sold-out gig at the Underworld in London's Camden Town, which was a pretty special gig for a few reasons, which I'll share in this live video review. Which, by the way, if you find yourself enjoying this content, I do this a lot, so consider subscribing to see more reviews like this in future. But anyway, before we get to the live set by House of Protection that night, this was not normal. New bands don't play their first gig as a one-off in LA and their second gig as a one-off in London. Like, it doesn't make financial sense to do that because it's a very expensive process to fly yourselves over and your equipment to set up for one gig and then fly back in a 500 max capacity venue, as was the Underworld in Camden. They're not getting enough money to make that gig worthwhile. That's a really interesting choice. And we'll get to some of this later on, but when I asked Stephen from the band, like, why this choice? Apparently they love London. And they've always been received well by London, their previous bands, and they just really, really wanted to play a gig in London, so they made that happen. And they liked that venue, and it was that simple. It seems very much that House of Protection, in the small amount of time that they've been a band, are making decisions based on how interesting, how connective, how rewarding, and unique an experience it might be, either with the songs that they write, or the choices they make as a band for their music videos, or the gigs that they play. That's so fucking cool. And it's a really exciting thing to watch and try and experience and be a part of, because who knows where they're going? They're not really very predictable. That's part of the charm, I think, of this band. Now, speaking of not being predictable, their opening act, I'd never heard of them before, is an act called Sullii. It's spelled Sullii. And it was interesting. They were clearly a UK act, right? So a UK support opener makes some sense. But I didn't get the sense that there were that many people in the audience who were familiar with them. It was very much an audience for House of Protection. There were a few people down front who were singing along and seemed to know it. But it seemed to be a UK hip-hop with a twist of kind of emo rock occasionally in the sort of stylings of it. And it was quite sweet. There was a real vulnerability about the main vocalist for this group, seemingly anchored in, felt like real stories and experiences, which was kind of an exposing thing to do in such an intimate environment on stage. So props to them for the concept of what they were doing and how they delivered it. I thought some of the vocals themselves, the pitching was not the most refined perhaps, but that's okay. There was a realness to it, and I think that's kind of the point. It's about creating something that sonically will connect in some way, that expresses what they want to express in a meaningful way, that is elevated in a musical form here and there. There's a bit of variety in there, some slow kind of hip-hop songs. There's also some faster-paced sort of pop-punk emo moments in there. And they had a DJ and a live guitarist. Live guitarist played maybe a tenth of the time, from what I could gather. There was a lot of guitar work that went through the backing track. It wasn't clear which parts they were necessarily doing live, but it added a bit to the visual spectacle of it. And there was a lot of the main vocal going through the backing track, which the vocalist would kind of double to give it a bit more of that live connective edge. And you know what? Normally, it wouldn't really be for me. But maybe there's something in the air. There was something about the intimate environment of that gig and the way that they performed and the sort of sweet shyness that they had that you kind of felt for them and you gave them the space, and the crowd, I think, did enjoy it. In fact, Stephen of House of Protection, during a couple of songs, went to the front of the standing area and bounced along and sang along with the words. It sounds like this was a few years in the making. They really wanted to play a gig with this particular artist. So that's a cool moment. And another allusion to the fact that House of Protection do what they want to do. You know, they could have been advised by people to get maybe a better known act or a more rock-based act perhaps to open for them, but they chose this person particularly. And perhaps for what they wanted to create that evening, it created the right atmosphere and energy to begin with. But it was grand. I found it interesting. I enjoyed the set for what that was. Certainly intriguing. And I think, having listened to a couple of their recorded songs beforehand, having seen them live, I'm now more interested to hear their recordings and get more into the details there, because a couple of the moments in there really landed for me. So an interesting act there in Sullii. Now, once Sullii had finished their set, there was obviously a bit of break between them and the next band, which is the one and only band to remain, House of Protection. When it was their time to come on stage, there was a projector screen at the back of the stage and a video played with some text on it and essentially some guiding words as to how they would recommend people experience this show.
This house, we invite the unexpected and encourage you to bring your energy wherever you see fit. In this house, we protect each other and lift each other up at all costs. And in this house, for the next 40 minutes, we will create something that cannot be experienced the same way ever again anywhere else.
It seemed to be very much the ethos of the band. This room became a sort of house of protection against people feeling like they couldn't express themselves or set themselves free to jump around and enjoy themselves freely without fear of being, judged or feeling stupid for kind of losing themselves in the music, which was a lovely expectation to set at the start. You kind of gave the crowd the permission to enjoy this in whatever way they feel inspired to, as long as, no one's going to get hurt, etc., right? It was a sort of positive but enabling expectation set at the start by this video. An interesting move, but I think that probably helped create what happened at that gig, which is that at the very start of the first song, the first drop of whatever they would have said, like jump or go, the entire crowd started in unison jumping, which for a newish band, for very new, fine, the members from Fever 333 and Chariot in the past, but the songs are pretty new. The band is playing their second ever gig. The crowd was right there with you from the start. I think in part because of that call to arms to express yourself and let yourself be free and enjoy this thing. And that was pretty spectacular. Given the first song had that, and to be fair, every single song for the entire set had at least most of the moments where the crowd was jumping up and down in unison and singing along and having a great time. It was really quite something. The energy in that room was amazing, and it was set by the two individuals on stage, in Stephen Harrison and Aric Improta, who is obviously a godlike drummer. I've enjoyed his previous projects of Night Verses in particular, and also his solo work that he's done on the drums. Those songs landed so well live. There's a fair amount of stuff going through the backing tracks, of course, right? Live, you have live drums, you have a live guitar, you got live vocals. Everything else is going to be supported in bass and the rest and other electronic effects, which helps with the mix, but at the same time, if your voices don't cut through well, then it's kind of all for nothing. The vocals from Stephen were great. What I loved in particular was that they weren't perfect. There was a rawness to it, and yet also a polish to the songwriting and the delivery of that, and they're very well experienced live performers. So that carried through, and it gave them the freedom to express themselves openly and with energy and kind of go with the crowd. It felt very much like a conversation between the artist and the audience and vice versa. We were all in this thing together somehow, which was a really cool moment to be part of. They played for something like 40 minutes or so, and every single song, and they don't have many, every single song hit in some different way, mostly with the high energy bits and pieces, but also got songs like Being One, which is a little bit more tranquil, and that was gorgeous. They had a brand new song that they debuted that no one had heard yet, which they have a working title of Fire for, because you shout fire at several points during that song. No one's heard this song, right? But it absolutely moved the crowd. Everyone's jumping up and down in unison. We're shouting along with the words because they're simple and grabby enough that you can do that. That's so impressive for a song no one's heard before, to connect and have everyone going crazy. Again, that is testament to the energy and the performance of Stephen and Aric and the way that they empowered the crowd to join them during the set in the way that they did. There were consistent moments where someone would be crowd surfing on the stage. They'd jump up and crowd surf back. And it wasn't like, all right, guys, let's crowd surf. It was more come up on stage And it wasn't like just a sentiment because it would look cool. They would, like, Stephen would be beckoning to someone who's kind of crowdsourcing, like, come here, brother. Like, we were all in this thing together as one. It was an amazing thing that they managed to create. It felt super natural and authentic, and yet visually and orally really fucking exciting. For the most part, of course, Aric Improta is going to be glued to the stool of the drum set so we can actually play the instrument, but also he did some of his signature bits and pieces like jumping on the stool and spinning around and then getting back down and playing, or he'd stand up in between certain moments in songs. He was very animated in the moments that he could be. Stephen was bouncing around all over the stage as much as he could in between kind of vocal moments, which is really cool and vividly entertaining for the eyes as well. They also had some interesting, fun set pieces which you don't really expect from a small venue gig like that one. For example, they had a ton of these blow-up, glowing balloons, beach balls, I suppose is probably a more accurate term for that, which they threw out into the crowd. So they were bouncing all over the place, which gave a bit more of a visual spectacle, as well as, giving people something fun to kind of batter around each other. It felt like we're all in this together, keeping these balls volleyed up in the air. It's kind of fun. Later on, there was a moment where they were throwing out flowers. I think maybe it was the last song. I grabbed one of them as well. Not real flowers, because, thorns can be quite... They're also pretty prickly, actually, at times, so... That's another interesting thing. Just little moments like that they've thought through that isn't just stand on stage, play the songs, and then leave. They're trying to make moments that anchor particular songs for you. In another song, Stephen got a stool and took it into the middle of the crowd, which was a beautiful moment. Right in the middle of the crowd, you can see a massive column here because the underworld is a strange venue for support structures. But Stephen is on top of this stool, everyone's in around him, he's asking everyone to have their phones up with the lights, and it looked beautiful. It was a wonderful, close, intimate, connective moment there for that particular song. Very memorable. And Stephen said later on, he's like, that moment was amazing for him. He's going to remember that for the rest of his life. And it didn't feel like that was him just being sort of flippant about it to make it sound like it was a great thing. You could see and feel how much that whole thing meant to them as they performed in that way. There was also a surprise feature from one Jordan Fish, who produced their music, as he jumped on stage, grabbed a mic, and did some vocals before hurling himself off into the crowd to crowd surf his way off the stage at that point. Again, a moment where it seemed like he's just part of it to have fun, let himself go a little bit. We're all in this sort of thing together as a connected audience, which is really cool to see. I was lucky enough to have a chat with Jordan later on that night, and I asked him about that moment, and he said it wasn't planned. He was not planning to jump on stage, grab a mic, do that, and then crowd surf. But he said, that's just, it felt like the appropriate thing to do at the time. Very much in keeping with what House of Protection are setting up there. Like, be free, feel what you're feeling, and let's enjoy a show together. So that's what Jordan did. It was a fucking cool moment. The whole thing was a sort of cool punk rock attitude, but without it being super angsty. It was much more kind of positive, supportive, and all about creativity without limits in a constructive sort of way. It was a really amazing atmosphere that they managed to create. My only concern with this was, this is a small venue, and I've traditionally seen moments where bands can do this kind of connective energy in a small, intimate venue. I wonder how this kind of thing might translate when they get bigger and they're playing kind of academies or arenas in future. How are they going to recreate some of this thing? They probably can't do it exactly like for like, right? So if you really want this experience, see them as soon as you possibly can while they're playing these level of shows. But I have to imagine, given the creativity of the individuals, they will find a way to capture at least some of this and recreate this on bigger stages in future. But either way, I'm so fascinated to see how that plays out as they perform on larger stages in bigger venues with a different intimacy level between the audience and the artists. Now, I've alluded to this earlier, but the experience didn't end with just the live show once they finished their last song. The band hung out to connect with people. They were signing bits and pieces and chatting to people. And what was really amazing about that is it didn't feel performative in any way. And how that is exemplified is they weren't coming in to shake people's hands and go, thanks for coming, and move them along. They stayed and talked in focus, fully actively listening to whoever it was that was staying around to talk to them, until the audience member decided that they'd said everything that they wanted to say, and themselves decided, cool, thanks, cheers, and off they go. At no point did Steven or Aric go, thanks, anyway, I better, like, I heard one audience member talking to Steven for, I swear to you, about 10 minutes straight about the difference between the pros and cons of Marshall amps versus Orange amps. Like in a very natural, relaxed conversation of just two dudes who like playing guitar talking about guitars. It was an incredible, and all the other people that wanted to be having conversations would patiently wait but also enjoy that conversation. It was all so real and so human and so natural. There were no egos to be had from any of them. So that was a delight. It was a pleasure. I managed to chat to Steven for a little bit about, what it's like, because this is the first time he's ever created a band from scratch. He's often been joining bands that are pre-existing. So he was talking about how exciting and crazy that was, and how much he was getting out of these just 2 gigs they've done thus far because of the unique experience that is for him. It was so cool to hear him talk about that in a passionate way. And also a joy to talk to Aric Improta. Obviously being a drummer, that was a bit of a special experience for me. And talking about his work with Night Verses and his 40-minute drum solo creative video he did, and the challenges he was finding, or the, in a fun way. It's not a challenge for him, but the unique creative opportunity with House of Protection to write more simplified drums that elevate the groove and allow the vocals to shine in a certain way that maybe he doesn't do with his other acts, and the challenges he found with that, and the kind of interest and fun he was finding with that as well, and the singing along whilst drumming and the challenges there. It was so cool to talk to him on that level about those kind of details, about what makes House of Protection the band that it is. And similarly, Jordan Fish hung out for a bit, and I got to chat to him about the Bring Me the Horizon shows I went to and enjoyed, and some of the production work he's doing with the recent artists. And he was a super down-to-earth, really interesting individual to chat to. Very chill, just like the House of Protection guys. It was such a beautifully human evening, and I think everyone that was there got that same sentiment out of it. Like how could more gigs be like this? There was something special there. It doesn't seem like rocket science. It's about setting the right expectation, creating music with a certain kind of energy and vibe, and just being a little bit free with it. It was spectacular. At the end of that gig, I felt like someone had injected lightning into my body via my ears. It was a genuinely special experience, and one that I won't soon forget. And I would advise you to keep your eyes peeled to see if they end up playing a gig near you, and trying to go to it at the level that they're at right now, maybe when they can do more of these more intimate gigs. It really is something quite special. And one that's quite tricky to sum up in words, to be honest, but I've done what I can here to try and translate as much as I could about that experience for those that weren't able to come along to that gig. And if you enjoyed this, and this is something you'd like to see more of, then let YouTube know by subscribing to this channel. I love checking out live gigs and sharing my experience through videos here, along with the footage that I'm able to grab. There'll be more of those coming up real soon on this channel. I also review new music as and when it comes out, and I have a podcast where I interview artists about their musical experiences and songwriting decisions and the rest. So thank you for watching this, and hopefully you'll come back for another video very soon.